Right. So, look, thank you very much for making the time and effort to join us this evening. With me, I've got David Wallace from Armillary Capital. And of course, Armillary Capital run the Unlisted platform, or USX, in New Zealand, which is sometimes seen as an alternative to the New Zealand Stock Exchange. But look, we'll be exploring a bit of that in tonight's short chat. So, again, welcome all. A copy of this recording will be available on the NZSA website. And we look forward to hearing from David this evening. David, good evening.
Good evening. How are you? And I'm going to do the worst thing and start with an apology. I'm sitting in an airport, so if there's a bit of background noise, I apologise for that.
Look, that is simply a symptom of the busy lives that we lead, so we get that completely. Look, first off, why don't you tell us a little bit about Unlisted and its role as you see it in the New Zealand investment ecosystem?
Yep, sure, thanks. So Unlisted's got a history that dates back to around about November 2003. It was established when the NZX decided to take down what was known as the grey market. And we've been managing the USX since about 2009, I think it was. Right. And its position in the New Zealand market is really around providing a low compliance market where companies can list their shares and have them traded by their shareholders through the broker community. We do see it as a stepping stone market, but if we can find some issuers and bring them onto our market and they can learn to be a listed company and then take off their training wheels and go up to the NZX, then we've done a great thing for the capital markets.
Right. And in terms of the sort of core philosophy that you've got at Unlisted, I mean, what's the main difference, I guess, in terms of philosophy between an NZX listed entity and a USX listed entity?
Yeah. So our philosophy around markets is that the provider of a market shouldn't be regulated, that the issuers and the participants in the market in terms of the brokers and investors are the ones that should actually be regulated for good behaviour. Things like continuous disclosure and announcements and things like that. So we take very much a light touch approach to monitoring compliance. We do our best, but we don't have a big monitoring team sitting there.
Right. So very much that you're relying on issuers and investors to actually do their own sort of work around making those announcements on the issuer side, but actually investors being able to do their own research or use what information they have to actually make an assessment about an organisation.
Yes, and we provide things like our annual or our quarterly and issuer profiles and bits and pieces to help with that information discovery piece.
Right.
We recognise that information discovery is important, and things like providing the market with good quality announcements and things go to a cost of capital and liquidity. So, it's very much up to the issuer to make sure they are acting as a good issuer. And we tell new issuers that the listing isn't the end of the journey. In fact, it's just the start. That talking to the market and educating the market around why you're a good story and educating the broking community is just as important, and that's really hard work post-listing.
What sort of risks and opportunities can investors expect when they're looking at an unlisted company?
Yep. So, any companies on our market, the biggest risk is there is a lot less liquidity. Right. And I think that, that goes to a lot of the smaller stocks on the NZX as well. So is the information in the market as good as an NZX company? No. But there are also some little gems for those who are prepared to take a bit of time and have a look at the company and have a think about where they are in the market and what they're trying to achieve, and that's really the big opportunity. But as with all investing, every time you invest $1, there's a big amount of risk with that investment.
Yeah, so it's still about investors understanding that risk and balancing it off against the opportunity that's available.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah. And in terms of, you mentioned briefly before around that philosophy around companies and issuers. What sort of compliance mechanisms do you have at USX?
Yeah, so we have, we have very limited ability on what we can do with our issuers that don't comply, other than basically to suspend trading until they get back in compliance. And we've experienced and are currently experiencing one issuer who has failed to deliver an audited set of accounts. Having audited accounts within 4 months of the end of the financial year is a criteria for our issuers, and if they don't deliver them, then we will suspend them.
Right.
Our issuers are still subject to all of the legislation in terms of the Companies Act and the Financial Reporting Act and Takeovers Code and Fair Trading Act and all of those sorts of things, and those companies still have to comply with those. Amazing the number of directors who actually don't realise their responsibilities under all that legislation.
And of course, we've seen a recent example on the NZX where ultimately the NZX had no choice but to do exactly the same as that in terms of suspending trading. Referring to QX Logistics, which ultimately no amount of incentive could actually make that company comply with the requirements. And so ultimately, is that the same sanction that's the same ultimate sanction that both exchanges have?
Yeah, so and you're right in that those are the only sanctions we certainly have. Obviously, the NZX has a big regulatory process, and they can fine issuers and things like that. So, there is an impost on the ultimate shareholders of the company not performing its or complying with the rules on the NZX, and that is a problem. But suspension or delisting is, at the end of the day, it's the ultimate outcome.
Yep. And it is interesting because, of course, that outcome does result in a public company trading in, well, what's essentially it can't trade. Has shareholders have got no ability to trade a share in that situation unless it's a private transaction.
Yeah, going completely dark is almost worse for a shareholder than
absolutely.
Having at least a limited ability and some insights to be able to do something, and that's one of the big challenges.
Yeah, no, look, that's something we completely agree with. I mean, certainly and we've seen that with those QEX shareholders, where actually the company is dark, and that was why we were so strident in our sort of opposition to that company initially putting forward its plans to delist, because ultimately you've got now a public company where shareholders have got no transparency, no ability to hold the company to account, and very little ability to trade. So
the shareholders, the only way the shareholders can keep the company to account is at the AGM. And if the company doesn't have an AGM or doesn't find its annual report, they've got to take some civil sanctions, because what we see is the Companies Office and MD and things, they don't tend to chase down companies which aren't complying with the Financial Reporting Act.
Yeah. And for a smaller company, it's actually quite difficult to take a civil sanction simply because of the cost involved, right?
Well, for an individual shareholder, it certainly is.
Yeah. So we talked a bit about risks and opportunities, talked about the compliance element. What's sort of next for Unlisted as an exchange?
Yeah. Look, it's a really interesting question, and in fact, I've got a call at 8 o'clock in the morning with our current platform provider, to talk about a new upgrade for the platform that may or may not have some quite cool new features and functions in terms of things around primary issuance and possibly some direct trading. We haven't made a decision on that. There's issues around AML and CFT and clearing and settlement and stuff that needs to be dealt with, and so there are some ideas. I think there's some opportunity around some different market modes with limited period trading or auction-based trading and all of these things that we're starting to see. So and I'm also exploring the idea of liquidity provision to help some of these companies make sure they have bids and offers in the market, and that's something that goes back to the company. So there's some ideas there.
So like a market maker type arrangement.
Yeah, and those ideas take they take time to come to fruition. By the time we make sure we can do them on the platform, we try to use the technology to drive as much as possible, and then think about what does that mean from a regulatory perspective, and that means talking to the FMA and NB and making sure we're not breaching things like insider trading by mistake or market manipulation and all of those other scary things that Oliver and his predecessors have been working so hard to stamp out of our markets.
Yes, no, and we still do work hard at that. You're quite right. I mean, it is interesting. I guess we saw last year the launch of Catalyst, and that's a limited time exchange.
Yep.
With
option based.
Yep, option based. Sorry. And I guess we've also seen phenomenal change recently in terms of Sharesies and Hatch coming into the market as well, and that offers opportunities for retail investors to participate in a very different way. And someone has already asked the question in the chat around: does Sharesies have a role in future with Unlisted? Will you let Sharesies users trade on your platform?
Look, we are communicating with Sharesies regularly. We would love to have them as a broker. They haven't quite got there yet because they're looking around the world at obviously the NZX, ASX, the US markets, and obviously to be able to provide their investor community access to those markets is a lot more valuable to them as a company, and probably a lot more valuable to their investors.
Yep.
We understand that. We would love to be connected with them, and we think they're doing an absolutely fantastic job educating the wider population about investing in financial products and shares and all those sorts of things. And they've built a great business, and I take my hat off to them. But yeah, I think we've just got to be patient. But to work within their time frame, they've got limited technology development budget and limited people and things. But
sure.
I think that team should be very proud of what they've achieved.
How many companies are actually on the USX, and what's the approximate total market cap of the exchange?
Yeah, so we've got around about 18 issuers, 19 securities. The combined market cap is around about 3.5 billion. And that ranges from Zespri at the very top end, which in itself as a company has some quirks in that it's constitutionally only allowed growers to own its shares.
Yes.
We've had to put some systems and processes in place with our broker community to make sure that's complied with. All the way down to, I think the smallest is Spears Group at around about $1 million of market cap.
Right.
We've got a bunch that in that kind of sub 30 mil or sub 50 mil, and a whole big bunch above 100 mil, including Skyline and Silverfern Farms, and we've obviously seen the takeover play around Blue Sky Meats recently, and SIF Technologies, and so there's a real mixture, a few wine stocks. I'd love to see us getting more agricultural based issuers on our market, and we've been talking to a few parties in that sector to try and get them there. So there's a real interesting range.
So there's still an ongoing goal, if you like, to grow the exchange and scale that further.
Yeah, I remember when we were talking to the then Commerce Minister about the exemption we were applying for. So we're exempt from the licensing requirements of the Financial Markets Conduct Act. And he said, "What do you want to do? Do you want to be do you want to have a 10 billion combined market cap?" And I said to him, "Well, actually, if I've got 50 issuers, I'm probably happier. I really, market cap's a nice measure, but at the end of the day, it's all about the number of companies that we can bring into let's call it a public trading environment,
Right.
and help them learn to be good companies in terms of, or good issuers. And if we lose a few to the NZX, fantastic. That's a tick for us as far as I'm concerned. And if we keep the rest, then even fantastic. So, our focus is on number of issuers and number of brokers.
So it's actually about bringing companies from your perspective, just saying, repeating a point you mentioned earlier, bringing companies out from the dark and into the trading light, if you will.
Yeah.
So investors can trade their shares, and there's market valuation attached to that.
Yep. One of the biggest challenges, as we know, with private companies is your limited ability to access liquidity. Now, just because you're listed on a market doesn't necessarily you're liquid, but at least you're getting some transparency into some price discovery. It might not be the price might have a little discount because of the limited communications, but if we can bring them out of that untradable to tradable, then fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. Look, we have had a few questions come in. I know that Jim wants to ask a question as well. So I'll find Jim in a minute and unmute him so he can ask his question. We had a question here from Aaron. Who do you see as your main competitors, and where do you fit in that sort of broader funding, the ecosystem between crowdfunding right through to that listed exchange?
Yeah. So interestingly, and we thought about this for a long time, we don't see the NZX as a competitor.
Yep.
We know Catalyst are there, and we know Syndex are there. Syndex providing a trading platform for property syndications, and Catalyst trying to do some stuff around capital raising. Our biggest competitor in my mind are those companies doing nothing. We would rather see those companies come out and come into a listed environment, put their hands up and show off how fantastic they are. So do nothing is my biggest competitor as far as I'm concerned.
No, that's fair. Jim had his hand raised. So Jim, if you want to ask a question, do that in the chat, or just unmute yourself and ask David directly when you're ready to do that. While we're waiting for that, I guess I do have one more question. It's a bit sort of a future-focused one. What do you think are the sort of major changes that will face New Zealand's capital markets generally?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. We think about the capital markets a lot, and I think, and I'll go back to the Sharesies comment, is I think they've done a really good job of helping people understand around providing capital to companies, i.e. owning shares or investing in companies. And I think over time we'll probably, I'm hoping we will see some shift away from property investment to investment in productive assets.
Yep.
The capital creation process of an IPO or a crowdfunding issue or something like that, I think we are seeing some changes there, but crowdfunding is still very much driven by companies looking to raise capital that are generally a business to consumer type product, and the people investing have an affinity with the company. So, crowdfunding is really important. Is an important part of the capital creation process. I would love to see the IPO process made easier. I would love to see the lockup caused by AML, CFT and compliance ease in the broking community, and see them getting back to having some entrepreneurial spirit around finding new companies for their clients to invest in. These things take time. I don't think it's going to happen in a hurry. But I think seeing people provide or get to know businesses and back them with their capital and support the entrepreneurs, because they're the ones that create jobs and they're the ones that actually make this economy go, as far as I'm concerned.
If I'm reading between the lines of what you're saying there, so are you suggesting that actually you'd like to see the broken community has been consumed by compliance for a little while? Are you saying you'd like to see that balance swing back in favour of investment banking risk?
Yeah. Look, I have often thought and pondered whether we should, how do we better support small companies through the capital creation process? I think the catalyst concept goes part way there.
Right.
I don't think we've found the answer because, what we see in investing is we really need some people to stand up and kind of find some of these gems and be prepared to back them and
Right.
put their hand up in some form. And if you look at angel investing, and I've got some experience there as a board member of Mainland Angel Investors, we talk about the hero investor or the lead investor who really picks up a little company and says, yeah, I really like this, I'm going to put my heart and soul into, or I'm going to back it with some dollars and I'm going to help it. And that prompts other people to kind of sit up and go, oh, okay, that's interesting, maybe I will have a close look at it.
Yeah. One of the things that we've sort of noticed as we went through it, because last year was the first year that NZSA actually did a system-wide assessment of USX companies, and we probably did, I'm trying to remember, maybe 8 or 9 issuers, which is still less than the ratio we do for the NZX, I might add. NZX, we do pretty much all of them. But the one thing we did often notice was that sort of versus and admittedly our standards go beyond a compliance exercise. We're first to admit that. And we also don't treat this as a tick the box exercise either. We do try to have a discussion and get the company's context. One thing that was interesting was that often USX companies have a reason why they can't list on NZX or why they prefer to list on USX. And I'll think, that the co-op structure for Zespri is a good example of that, and actually even Silver Fern Farms, arguably. Some others I'm less sure about, but I guess I'm just curious as to how you look. Aaron's actually summarised a good question here around that. Does our scrutiny of those USX companies, do you feel it adds value in the longer term?
Do I feel it adds value?
Yeah.
Look, to me it adds value because it's somebody else talking about an issuer on our market. And when someone talks about an issuer, someone else might read it and go, oh boy, that's really interesting. I'll go and have a look at it.
Okay.
Because, the broken community obviously does not recommend our issuers for investment that we're aware of. So investors have got to do their own legwork. And that means, that's so anything anyone else is doing, talking about investor, whether it's a business news media or some things that we do or some things that you do or anything like that is good. It's really good, and I think that as long as we're all trying to educate people around investing and the risks in investing and what's good and what's worth thinking about, then that's all worthwhile.
Okay. And linked to that, I mean, is there then a risk on your part that if we're looking at these companies and assessing them, does that actually hinder you in your ability to get new companies because they don't want that exposure from people like us looking at? Or do you think that's a red herring?
Oh, look, I think it's a bit of a red herring. We see a number of arguments from companies about why they wouldn't want to list. It's fair to say, our target list is generally, any company with more than 25 shareholders. Believe it or not, there's about 1,300 in New Zealand with more than 25 shareholders. So the universe, if you take out of that all the water schemes and all the property syndication schemes, the universe between ourselves and the NZX is really only about 400 to 500 companies that have got that many shareholders. So when you start whittling things down like that, and it starts to get really interesting. One of the challenges for a lot of people is they just want to keep everything private.
Yep.
They are concerned they'll get in the public arena and there'll be a bit of tall poppy syndrome, or they'll get into trouble, or the added cost is all too much, and you hear all of those issues, and what they don't realise is that they are also putting a barrier up for potential investors to go, well, I won't be able to trade those shares, so why would I want to invest in that company? To me, it's like in crowdfunding, when companies go and issue non-voting shares, why would you disenfranchise the owners of your business? I find that incredibly short-sighted.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's the same role for any market. Markets are about raising capital, and most companies figured that out in a big way during the COVID period, of course.
Yep.
That capital, that ability to raise capital was utterly essential.
Yes.
A question from Jim. So he's asking, how can you buy from unlisted when your broker, ASB by the sound in this case, doesn't allow access, and you don't want to go to the hassle of setting up an account with one of the registered brokers?
Interesting. I've had a smorgasbord of discussions with ASB, and I would love to have them as a broker as well.
Right.
One of the online brokers, well, in fact, quite often we do point people towards Jarden Direct.
Yep.
It's completely online. AML's super easy. You don't have, I don't think you have people scrutinising what you want to do in your wealth and all of those sorts of things. So that's where we tend to recommend people. I apologise to all the other brokers out there, but the Jarden Direct and the old direct broking as we knew them is probably the best platform to go to.
Okay.
And if you email me, that's what I'd say.
Right. Okay. And what are the just to follow up on that? I mean, is that actually a barrier for you in terms of growth? What would it take for brokers to actually be more receptive to the unlisted offer, as it were?
Yeah. Well, if you look at our broking community, we've got Jardins, we've got Craig's, we've got JB Ware, we've got Hobson Wealth, and we've got Forsyth Bar and
Right.
Craig's. They are the big ones, right? And then Hamilton and Green, and a lot of the other independent shops who use Hobson Wealth or Jardins to trade will also allow people to trade on our market. It's actually ASB is the only kind of outlier.
Right.
It's really interesting because we touched on Sharesies and we touched on the broking community as well. I would love to see some more brokers in this market, and I would love to see better transparency or transferability of clients between some of the brokers, or a simpler sign-up process or whatever, and it probably goes to the Sharesies thing.
Yeah. I'm very conscious that your flight's probably going to be called soon. So it's one last question here from Frank, which is, what would it take to have Computershare and Link to pass on standing proxies given to NZSA to the USX companies, where Computershare and Link are the company registries? I think what that's getting at is it's a more manual process at the moment. When we have standing proxies, they don't apply to USX companies, they only apply to companies on the NZX.
Okay. So most of our issuers, I think all bar two, use Link and Computershare as their registries. So I am surprised that is the case.
Good to know.
And I don't. Well, no one's ever told me, so it's kind of hard to know. So I can go and ask, if they're not doing it, and I don't know why they're not doing it. So
okay. And look, now that I know the answer to that question, I can follow up too. So
we'll go and ask
chat.
Stan Malcolm at Link and
Stuart,
current Stuart at Computershare, that ask him the question, because if they're not helping their customers, then maybe they need to be brought to account on that.
I mean, I think it's also sometimes the companies choose to do it themselves rather than get their registry to do things, and that's a fairly common story that we get quite a lot. So they might So the company might use them as a registry, but sometimes their voting arrangements, they do that in house. They run their own processes around that.
Yep, fair enough. Thank you for the question, Bob.
It's a good question. Yeah. We can chat more about that.
We will.
Yeah. Hey, look, if there's no further questions, then we'll let you catch your flight. Thank you very much for making the time this evening. We really appreciated that. And obviously we will get the recording out on our website through our platforms pretty soon, and we'll get that hopefully to you as well, David. Again, thank you for making time. Great to chat, and no doubt we'll keep talking.
Brilliant. Thanks, Oliver, and thank you everybody for listening. Hopefully I made some sense. We look forward to chatting soon.
Thank you, David. Take care.
See you. Bye.
Bye.